Elena Martinez stood in the grand foyer of her childhood home, watching her mother's face crumble as the reality hit. The foreclosure papers in Elena's hand weren't just legal documents. They were 32 years of pain, manipulation, and stolen dreams finally coming full circle. Margaret Thompson, the woman who had called her daughter worthless countless times, now clutched the stair railing as her knees buckled. The house that had been in the Thompson family for 4 generations, the house Margaret had stolen from Elena through lies and legal manipulation, now belonged to the daughter she had tried so hard to destroy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of Margaret's sharp intake of breath echoed through the marble-floored entryway, the same entryway where she had once screamed at 15-year-old Elena that she would never amount to anything. But as Margaret's eyes met Elena's calm, composed gaze, something had fundamentally shifted. The power dynamic that had defined their relationship for over 3 decades had just reversed in the most dramatic way possible. The story of how Elena Martinez went from being the forgotten daughter to owning her family's empire begins in the sprawling suburbs of Austin, Texas, where appearances mattered more than authenticity, and family loyalty was just another currency to be traded. The Thompson estate sat on 5 acres of prime real estate, a testament to old Texas oil money that had been carefully preserved through 3 generations. But for Elena, growing up in that mansion felt more like serving a sentence than living a privileged life. Elena was born when her mother Margaret was already 42. An unexpected pregnancy that Margaret never let her forget was an inconvenience. By the time Elena took her first steps, her older brother David was already 17, the golden child who could do no wrong in Margaret's eyes. David inherited their father's natural charisma and business acumen, while Elena seemed to embody everything Margaret found disappointing about herself: quiet introspection, academic curiosity, and a stubborn independence that refused to be molded. Their father, Robert Thompson, had built Thompson Industries from a small oil exploration company into a diversified energy conglomerate worth over $50 million. He was a man who spoke in numbers and quarterly projections, showing affection through stock portfolios and trust funds rather than hugs and bedtime stories. When Elena was 7, Robert died suddenly of a heart attack during a board meeting, leaving behind a complicated web of assets, investments, and a will that would shape the rest of Elena's life. Margaret transformed overnight from a socialite wife into a ruthless business widow. She moved through the corporate world with calculated precision, consolidating power and eliminating anyone who questioned her authority. At home, she channeled that same ruthless energy into shaping her children according to her vision of what the Thompson legacy should represent. David, now 24 and fresh out of business school, was groomed to take over the company. Elena, barely 8 years old and still grieving her father, became the family's greatest disappointment. The verbal abuse started small, disguised as parental concern. Margaret would sigh heavily when Elena brought home report cards filled with A's in literature and history but B's in mathematics. She would shake her head when Elena preferred reading in the library to attending the country club's junior social events. She would make cutting remarks about Elena's appearance, her interests, her friends, always with the caveat that she was just trying to help Elena become her best self. As Elena entered her teenage years, the criticism intensified. Margaret had a particular talent for identifying Elena's vulnerabilities and exploiting them with surgical precision. When Elena struggled with acne, Margaret would book dermatology appointments while loudly discussing how important clear skin was for a young woman's prospects. When Elena gained weight during puberty, Margaret would leave diet books on her nightstand with highlighted passages about self-control and discipline. When Elena showed interest in creative writing, Margaret would dismiss it as an impractical hobby that would never contribute to the family's success. The most devastating attacks were psychological. Margaret had perfected the art of undermining Elena's confidence while maintaining plausible deniability. She would praise Elena's intelligence in public while privately telling her that being smart wasn't enough if you couldn't apply that intelligence practically. She would encourage Elena's academic achievements while simultaneously suggesting that academic success was meaningless without social connections and business savvy. Every accomplishment was diminished, every failure was magnified, and every moment of self-doubt was weaponized. David, meanwhile, lived in a completely different reality. He was Margaret's pride and joy, the son who validated every sacrifice she had made and every difficult decision she had navigated as a widow. David was charming where Elena was serious, socially adept where Elena was introspective, and business-minded where Elena was idealistic. Margaret showcased David at every opportunity, bringing him to board meetings, introducing him to influential contacts, and publicly praising his potential to carry on the Thompson legacy. The contrast was deliberate and cruel. At family dinners, Margaret would spend 20 minutes discussing David's latest business insights while barely acknowledging Elena's presence. At social gatherings, Margaret would introduce David as her brilliant son who was destined for greatness, while referring to Elena simply as "my daughter" without any accompanying praise or description. The message was clear: David mattered, Elena didn't. Elena's response to this treatment revealed a resilience that would serve her well in later years. Rather than internalize Margaret's criticisms completely, Elena channeled her pain into academic excellence. She threw herself into her studies with an intensity that impressed even her harshest teachers. She read voraciously, wrote constantly, and developed a sharp analytical mind that would eventually become her greatest asset. While Margaret dismissed Elena's academic achievements as irrelevant to real-world success, Elena was quietly building the intellectual foundation that would eventually allow her to surpass everyone's expectations.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
High school brought new forms of psychological warfare. Margaret seemed to take particular pleasure in sabotaging Elena's attempts to build relationships and explore her interests. When Elena was elected to the student council, Margaret dismissed it as a meaningless popularity contest. When Elena was accepted into the National Honor Society, Margaret suggested that academic honors were just participation trophies for students who couldn't excel in areas that actually mattered. When Elena began dating a classmate named Marcus, Margaret made cutting remarks about Elena's judgment and suggested that no quality boy would be interested in someone so serious and intense. The college application process became another battleground. Elena had her heart set on studying journalism at Columbia University, a dream that represented freedom from Margaret's suffocating influence and the chance to build an identity independent of the Thompson family dynamics. Margaret responded to this plan with a campaign of systematic discouragement that was breathtaking in its cruelty. She questioned Elena's ability to succeed in such a competitive environment, suggested that journalism was a dying industry with no financial prospects, and repeatedly reminded Elena that she would be foolish to turn her back on the security and opportunities that came with being a Thompson. When Elena's acceptance letter arrived from Columbia, along with a partial scholarship based on her academic achievements, Margaret's reaction was telling. Instead of celebrating her daughter's success, Margaret focused on the financial burden of the remaining tuition costs. She complained about the expense, questioned whether the investment was worthwhile, and suggested that Elena might be better served attending a local university where she could stay close to home and learn the family business. The fight that followed was the most honest conversation Elena and Margaret had ever had. Elena accused Margaret of trying to sabotage her future, while Margaret accused Elena of being ungrateful and selfish. The argument culminated with Margaret delivering the words that would haunt Elena for years to come. "You're worthless, Elena. You always have been. I don't know why I waste my time and money on someone who will never appreciate what this family has given her. Go to your precious college. See how far your attitude gets you in the real world." Elena left for Columbia that fall with those words ringing in her ears, but also with a determination to prove Margaret wrong that bordered on obsession. She excelled in her journalism program, earning internships at prestigious publications and developing relationships with professors who recognized her talent and drive. During school breaks, she worked rather than returning home, using the excuse of professional obligations to avoid the toxic dynamic that awaited her in Austin. The distance allowed Elena to gain perspective on her childhood that had been impossible while living under Margaret's constant criticism. Through therapy available at the University Counseling Center, Elena began to understand that Margaret's treatment wasn't about Elena's shortcomings, but about Margaret's own insecurities and need for control. This realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating because it freed Elena from the responsibility of earning Margaret's approval, heartbreaking because it confirmed that the mother-daughter relationship she had always hoped for was impossible. During Elena's junior year, David married his college girlfriend, Stephanie, in a lavish ceremony that Margaret orchestrated with military precision. Elena attended the wedding, but felt like an observer rather than a participant in her own family celebration. Margaret spent the entire reception introducing David and Stephanie to business contacts and discussing their plans to take over Thompson Industries, while Elena sat at a table with distant relatives who barely knew her name. The wedding was also where Elena first learned about the specifics of her father's will, information that Margaret had carefully concealed for over a decade. During a conversation with her great-aunt Patricia, Elena discovered that her father had actually left equal inheritances to both his children, with the Thompson family home specifically designated to be shared between David and Elena. Margaret had been serving as the executor of the estate, but the assets were supposed to be distributed when both children reached 25 years of age. This revelation sent Elena into a spiral of confusion and anger. She had grown up believing that David was the primary heir to the Thompson fortune, that her father had somehow recognized David's superior potential and planned accordingly. Learning that her father had actually intended for her to inherit equally forced Elena to reconsider everything she thought she knew about her family's dynamics and her own place within them. Elena confronted Margaret about the will during her next visit home, a conversation that revealed the full extent of Margaret's manipulation. Margaret admitted to concealing the details of the inheritance, but justified her actions by claiming that Elena wasn't mature enough to handle such responsibility. She suggested that Elena's academic pursuits and lack of business experience made her unsuitable to manage Thompson Industries' assets, and that transferring Elena's inheritance would be tantamount to throwing money away. The legal battle that followed consumed Elena's senior year of college. She hired an attorney with money borrowed from her great-aunt Patricia, who had become increasingly concerned about Margaret's financial management of the estate. The lawyer's investigation revealed that Margaret had been systematically draining Elena's inheritance through questionable business expenses and personal expenditures that she had disguised as estate management costs. Margaret fought the legal challenge with the same ruthlessness she brought to all her business dealings. She hired a team of expensive attorneys who questioned Elena's motives, her competence, and her loyalty to the family. Margaret portrayed Elena as an ungrateful daughter who was trying to destroy the family business out of spite and jealousy. She suggested that her college education had filled her head with unrealistic ideas about her own importance, and that Elena was being manipulated by outside influencers who wanted to get their hands on Thompson money. The court proceedings were brutal. Elena had to sit through hours of testimony that painted her as selfish, incompetent, and potentially dangerous to the family's financial stability. Margaret's attorneys presented Elena's academic achievements as evidence that she was impractical and out of touch with reality. They suggested that Elena's choice to study journalism rather than business demonstrated poor judgment and a fundamental misunderstanding of her responsibilities as a Thompson heir. Despite the emotional toll, Elena persevered through the legal process with the same determination that had carried her through years of psychological abuse. She testified about Margaret's pattern of manipulation and control, providing specific examples of how Margaret had undermined her confidence and limited her opportunities. She presented evidence of Margaret's financial mismanagement and demonstrated her own competence through her academic achievements and professional internships. The judge's ruling was a partial victory. Elena was awarded her rightful inheritance, but the legal fees and the depletion of assets meant that she received significantly less than what her father had originally intended. More importantly, the court ordered that the Thompson family home be sold and the proceeds divided equally between Elena and David, a decision that sent Margaret into a rage that was visible to everyone present in the courtroom. Margaret's reaction to losing control of Elena's inheritance was swift and vindictive. She cut off all financial support for Elena's final semester of college, forcing Elena to take out additional loans and work multiple jobs to finish her degree. Margaret also launched a campaign to isolate Elena from the rest of the family, spreading stories about Elena's betrayal and suggesting that Elena had chosen money over family loyalty. Elena graduated from Columbia with honors and immediately moved to San Francisco, accepting a position with a technology magazine that covered the emerging dot-com industry. The distance from Texas felt necessary for her emotional survival, but it also meant giving up any hope of rebuilding her relationship with Margaret or maintaining close ties with David, who had sided with Margaret throughout the legal battle. The move to San Francisco marked the beginning of Elena's professional renaissance. She threw herself into her work with the same intensity she had brought to her studies, quickly establishing herself as a talented writer who could translate complex technical concepts into accessible prose. The technology boom of the late 1990s provided endless opportunities for ambitious journalists, and Elena's combination of analytical skills and clear writing style made her a valuable asset to every publication she worked for. Within 3 years, Elena had moved from staff writer to senior editor, and her byline was appearing in major national publications. She specialized in investigative pieces about corporate governance and financial transparency, skills that she had developed through her legal battle with Margaret, but now applied to exposing corruption and mismanagement in the business world. Her work earned her a reputation for thoroughness and integrity that opened doors throughout the industry. Elena's personal life also began to flourish as she built relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. She dated fellow journalists, made friends with people who valued her intelligence and humor, and slowly began to heal from the psychological damage of her childhood. Therapy continued to be an important part of her life, helping her develop healthier patterns of thinking and relating to others. During this period, Elena maintained minimal contact with her family. She would call David on holidays and send cards for major occasions, but the conversations were strained and superficial. Margaret never called, and Elena never reached out to her. The silence was painful, but also peaceful, allowing Elena to develop her identity without the constant negative feedback that had shaped her childhood. Elena's breakthrough came when she was 28, in the form of an investigative piece about corporate pension fund mismanagement that earned her a Pulitzer Prize nomination. The recognition catapulted her career to a new level, leading to offers from major newspapers and magazines across the country. She chose to join the investigative team at a prominent financial publication, a position that came with significant prestige and a salary that finally allowed her to build real wealth independent of her family's resources. The success was deeply satisfying, not just for its professional value, but for what it represented symbolically. Elena had built a career based on exposing exactly the kind of financial manipulation and abuse of power that Margaret had practiced within their own family. Every corrupt executive Elena exposed, every financial crime she uncovered, felt like vindication for the injustices she had suffered as a child. Elena's growing expertise in financial investigations eventually led her to start freelance consulting for law firms handling complex corporate cases. This work was more lucrative than journalism and allowed her to build substantial savings while maintaining her independence. She was careful with her money, investing conservatively and living below her means, driven by a deep-seated need for security that stemmed from years of financial uncertainty and manipulation. By her early 30s, Elena had accumulated enough wealth to consider investing in real estate, a decision that would prove crucial to the eventual resolution of her family conflict. She started small, purchasing a duplex in San Francisco that she renovated and rented out. The project was successful enough that she began looking for additional investment opportunities, developing an expertise in distressed properties that needed significant rehabilitation. Elena's real estate investments were profitable, but they also served a deeper psychological need. The process of taking damaged, neglected properties and restoring them to their full potential felt like a metaphor for her own journey. Each successful renovation was proof that broken things could be fixed, that value could be created from careful planning and hard work, and that the past didn't have to determine the future. Meanwhile, back in Texas, the Thompson family was experiencing its own forms of distress. David had taken over the day-to-day operations of Thompson Industries, but he lacked the strategic vision and financial discipline that had made his father successful. The company was struggling to adapt to changes in the energy industry, and David's management style was creating internal conflicts that were affecting productivity and profitability. Margaret remained involved in the business as chairman of the board, but her advancing age and declining health were beginning to affect her judgment. She had also become increasingly isolated socially, as her pattern of manipulative behavior had eventually alienated many of the friends and business associates who had once formed her support network. The combination of business stress and personal loneliness was taking a visible toll on her mental and physical well-being. Elena learned about her family's struggles through occasional conversations with her great-aunt Patricia, who maintained relationships with both sides of the family conflict. Patricia was careful not to take sides, but she provided Elena with enough information to understand that Thompson Industries was facing serious financial challenges. Elena felt conflicted about this news. Part of her was satisfied to see Margaret and David facing consequences for their poor decisions, but another part of her was saddened by the decline of the family business that her father had worked so hard to build. The first crack in the wall of silence between Elena and her family came when David reached out to her directly, something that hadn't happened in over 5 years. He called Elena at her office in San Francisco, his voice carrying a tension and desperation that was immediately apparent.
David explained that Thompson Industries was facing a cash flow crisis that threatened the company's survival, and he wondered if Elena might be interested in providing financial assistance or advice. Elena's initial reaction was incredulous anger. After years of being treated as worthless and incompetent, her family was now asking for her help with the same business they had insisted she was too stupid to understand. The irony was so stark that Elena almost laughed out loud during the phone call. David seemed to recognize the awkwardness of the situation, but his desperation overrode any sense of shame or embarrassment. The conversation revealed the full extent of Thompson Industries' problems. David had made a series of poor investment decisions that had depleted the company's cash reserves, while Margaret's spending on personal expenses disguised as business costs had created additional financial strain. The company was behind on loan payments, facing potential lawsuits from vendors, and struggling to meet payroll obligations. Without immediate intervention, Thompson Industries would be forced into bankruptcy within 6 months. Elena listened to David's explanation with a mixture of professional interest and personal detachment. Her years of investigating corporate mismanagement had given her the expertise to quickly identify the root causes of Thompson Industries' problems, and her assessment was not encouraging. The company's difficulties weren't just the result of bad luck or market conditions. They were the direct consequence of poor leadership, inadequate financial controls, and a pattern of decision-making that prioritized short-term benefits over long-term sustainability. David's request for help was vague and unfocused, reflecting his own confusion about how to address the company's problems. He seemed to expect that Elena might simply write a check to cover the immediate cash flow shortage, without requiring changes to the management structure or business practices that had created the crisis. Elena realized that David still didn't understand the severity of the situation or the fundamental changes that would be necessary to save the company. Elena told David she would consider his request and get back to him within a week. This gave her time to conduct her own investigation into Thompson Industries' financial situation, using her professional contacts and investigative skills to develop a comprehensive understanding of the company's assets, liabilities, and prospects for recovery. What she discovered was worse than David had indicated during their phone call. Thompson Industries was essentially insolvent, with liabilities that exceeded assets by a significant margin. Margaret and David had been using creative accounting techniques to hide the extent of the company's problems, but the fundamental financial structure was unsustainable. The company's most valuable asset was the Thompson family home, which had been used as collateral for multiple loans and was now at risk of foreclosure if the company couldn't meet its debt obligations. The revelation about the house's vulnerable status triggered a complex emotional response in Elena. The Thompson mansion represented everything she had lost and everything she had been denied access to throughout her childhood. It was the symbol of Margaret's power and David's privilege, the stage where Elena's worthlessness had been performed daily for over 15 years. The possibility that the house might be lost to foreclosure felt like cosmic justice, but it also represented the final destruction of her family's legacy. Elena spent several sleepless nights weighing her options. She could walk away and let Thompson Industries collapse, which would provide her with a certain satisfaction, but would also mean the permanent destruction of her father's life work. She could provide financial assistance with no strings attached, which would rescue Margaret and David, but would also reward their incompetence and continue the pattern of Elena sacrificing for people who didn't value her contributions. Or she could use her financial resources strategically to gain control of the situation and reshape the family dynamics that had caused so much pain. The third option was risky and emotionally complex, but it also offered the possibility of real justice and resolution. Elena began developing a plan that would allow her to save Thompson Industries while also addressing the injustices she had suffered. The plan required careful timing, significant financial resources, and a willingness to engage in the kind of strategic thinking that Margaret had always claimed Elena was incapable of. Elena called David back exactly 1 week after their initial conversation. She told him that she was willing to help, but that her assistance would come with conditions that were non-negotiable. Elena would provide the emergency funding necessary to keep Thompson Industries operational, but she would also require significant changes to the company's management structure and financial practices. Most importantly, Elena would need to be granted voting control of the company's board of directors, effectively giving her the power to override Margaret's decision-making. David's response to these conditions revealed the depth of his desperation. Despite the fact that Elena's demands would essentially strip Margaret of her authority and place David in a subordinate position, he agreed to consider the proposal. Elena could hear Margaret arguing in the background during their phone call, her voice sharp with anger and disbelief. The idea that Elena might take control of Thompson Industries clearly violated every assumption Margaret had made about her daughter's capabilities and ambitions. Elena gave David and Margaret 48 hours to accept or reject her proposal. During this waiting period, she finalized the financial arrangements that would make her plan possible. She liquidated several of her real estate investments, arranged a line of credit secured by her remaining properties, and coordinated with her attorney to prepare the legal documents that would formalize her takeover of Thompson Industries. The call accepting Elena's conditions came from Margaret herself, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. Margaret agreed to Elena's terms, but she made it clear that she viewed Elena's intervention as an act of aggression rather than assistance. Margaret accused Elena of taking advantage of the family's vulnerability to settle old scores, a characterization that wasn't entirely inaccurate, but that ignored Margaret's role in creating the current crisis. Elena's return to Austin felt like entering a war zone. The Thompson mansion looked shabbier than she remembered, with deferred maintenance and declining landscaping that reflected the family's reduced circumstances. Margaret greeted Elena with icy politeness, while David maintained an awkward friendliness that couldn't hide his resentment at being rescued by the sister he had always dismissed.
The business rescue took 6 months of intensive work. Elena brought in management consultants, financial auditors, and legal advisors to conduct a comprehensive restructuring of Thompson Industries. She discovered additional problems that David and Margaret had concealed or ignored, including regulatory violations, employee lawsuits, and environmental liabilities that required immediate attention and significant financial resources to resolve. Elena approached the business turnaround with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to her investigative journalism. She interviewed every employee, reviewed every contract, and examined every financial transaction from the previous 5 years. The process revealed a pattern of mismanagement that was even worse than Elena had anticipated, but it also identified opportunities for improvement that could restore Thompson Industries to profitability. Margaret fought Elena's changes at every step, arguing that Elena's strategies were too aggressive and that her lack of industry experience made her recommendations suspect. Margaret seemed unable to accept that Elena possessed the business acumen and strategic thinking skills necessary to save the company. Even as Elena's interventions began to show positive results, Margaret continued to undermine her authority and question her decisions. The conflict came to a head during a board meeting where Margaret directly challenged Elena's decision to sell one of Thompson Industries' underperforming subsidiary companies. Margaret accused Elena of destroying the family legacy and suggested that Elena's real motivation was revenge rather than business success. The argument escalated until Elena finally responded with the directness that years of therapy and professional success had given her. Elena reminded Margaret that Thompson Industries had been on the verge of bankruptcy when Elena intervened, and that every difficult decision Elena had made was necessary to save the company from the consequences of Margaret and David's poor management. Elena also pointed out that Margaret's pattern of criticism and second-guessing was exactly the same behavior that had characterized Elena's childhood, and that Margaret's inability to acknowledge Elena's competence was damaging the company's recovery efforts. The confrontation forced other board members to choose sides, and their support for Elena was unanimous. Margaret found herself isolated and powerless, her authority undermined by her own poor judgment and Elena's demonstrated competence. The role reversal was complete. Elena was now the powerful decision-maker, while Margaret was reduced to ineffective complaining from the sidelines. Thompson Industries' recovery accelerated once Margaret's interference was neutralized. Elena's strategic changes began generating positive cash flow within 9 months, and the company's financial situation stabilized dramatically. Elena also implemented new governance structures and financial controls that would prevent the kind of mismanagement that had created the original crisis. During this period, Elena learned that the Thompson family home was still encumbered by multiple liens and was at risk for foreclosure despite the company's improving financial performance. The house had been used as collateral for so many loans that the total debt exceeded its market value, making it impossible for Margaret to refinance or sell the property at a profit. Margaret was facing the possibility of losing the house that had been in the Thompson family for 4 generations. Elena realized that this situation presented her with the ultimate opportunity to address the injustices of her childhood. If Margaret lost the house to foreclosure, Elena could potentially purchase it from the bank at a fraction of its original value. The house would finally belong to Elena. The daughter Margaret had called worthless would become the owner of the family's most prized possession. The foreclosure process moved slowly, giving Elena time to prepare her strategy. She monitored the legal proceedings carefully, ensuring that she would be ready to bid when the property was eventually auctioned. Elena also made sure that Margaret was aware of her intentions, partly out of fairness and partly to complete the psychological transformation that had begun with Elena's takeover of Thompson Industries. Margaret's reaction to learning about Elena's plans was explosive. She accused Elena of deliberately manipulating the situation to steal the family home, ignoring the fact that Elena's business interventions had actually delayed the foreclosure by stabilizing Thompson Industries' finances. Margaret seemed unable to accept that the house's vulnerable status was the direct result of her own poor financial decisions rather than Elena's strategic planning. The final confrontation between Elena and Margaret occurred in the study of the Thompson mansion, the same room where Margaret had once berated Elena for her academic interests and unrealistic ambitions. Margaret demanded that Elena abandon her plans to bid on the house, arguing that such an action would constitute the ultimate betrayal of family loyalty and filial duty. Elena's response was calm and measured, reflecting the emotional growth and professional confidence she had developed over the past decade. Elena reminded Margaret that family loyalty was supposed to work both ways, and that Margaret had forfeited any claim to Elena's consideration through years of abuse and manipulation. Elena also pointed out that she was offering Margaret a way to avoid the shame and financial devastation of foreclosure, since Elena's bid would at least ensure that the house remained within the family rather than being sold to strangers. Margaret refused to accept Elena's logic, clinging to the belief that Elena owed her obedience and sacrifice regardless of how Margaret had treated her. The conversation revealed that Margaret still didn't understand the fundamental changes that had occurred in their relationship, still believed that she could manipulate Elena through guilt and emotional pressure. Elena left that meeting knowing that reconciliation with Margaret was impossible. Margaret's inability to acknowledge Elena's worth or take responsibility for her own actions meant that any relationship between them would continue to be toxic and destructive. Elena felt sadness about this realization, but also relief that she no longer needed to hope for Margaret's approval or acceptance. The foreclosure auction took place on a cold morning in February, with Elena standing among a small group of real estate investors and bargain hunters who had gathered to bid on distressed properties. The Thompson mansion was the most valuable property being auctioned that day, but the complexity of its legal situation and the size of the investment required had deterred most potential bidders. Elena's bid was unopposed, allowing her to purchase the house for less than half its market value. The irony of the situation was perfect. The daughter who had been told she would never amount to anything was now the owner of the family home, having acquired it through exactly the kind of strategic thinking and financial acumen that Margaret had always insisted Elena lacked. The moment when Elena received the keys to the Thompson mansion was deeply symbolic. She walked through the rooms where she had endured years of criticism and emotional abuse, now seeing them from the perspective of an owner rather than an unwanted guest. The house felt different when she had the power to change it, to make it reflect her own values and priorities, rather than Margaret's need for social status and control.
Margaret's reaction to losing the house was a mixture of rage, disbelief, and genuine grief. Despite all the pain associated with their relationship, the house represented Margaret's identity and social position in ways that were fundamental to her sense of self. Losing the house meant losing the tangible symbol of the Thompson family legacy, and Margaret seemed to age years in the space of a few weeks. Elena felt no satisfaction in Margaret's suffering, but she also felt no obligation to relieve it. Margaret had created this situation through her own choices and actions, and Elena was simply dealing with the consequences in a way that finally served her own interests rather than Margaret's expectations. The story of Elena's transformation from worthless daughter to successful businesswoman and homeowner became a source of inspiration for other people who had survived family abuse and manipulation. Elena began speaking at conferences and writing articles about financial independence as a tool for escaping toxic relationships, sharing her experiences in ways that helped others recognize their own worth and potential. Elena's victory was complete but complex. She had proven Margaret wrong about her capabilities and worth, gained control of the family business, and acquired the house that represented everything she had been denied. But the cost of this victory was the permanent destruction of any possibility for a healthy family relationship, a loss that continued to cause Elena pain even as she celebrated her success. Thompson Industries continued to thrive under Elena's leadership, eventually growing beyond its original size and profitability. Elena's strategic vision and financial discipline proved to be exactly what the company needed to adapt to changing market conditions and competitive pressures. The business success validated Elena's abilities in ways that no amount of external recognition could match. The house itself became Elena's primary residence, though she renovated it extensively to remove the memories and associations that made it painful to inhabit. Elena turned Margaret's former bedroom into a home office, converted the formal dining room where she had endured so many uncomfortable family meals into a library, and transformed the basement where she had once hidden from Margaret's criticism into a comfortable entertainment space for the friends and colleagues who had become her chosen family. Margaret eventually moved to a modest apartment in a different part of Austin, her resources depleted by the financial crisis that had cost her the family home and business control. Elena maintained minimal contact with Margaret, primarily through David, who served as an intermediary for practical matters related to Thompson Industries and family legal issues. David's relationship with Elena remained complicated and somewhat artificial. He was grateful for Elena's intervention in saving the family business, but he also resented the role reversal that had made him subordinate to the sister he had always considered inferior. David struggled to adapt to Elena's leadership style and decision-making authority, often reverting to the dismissive attitudes that had characterized his behavior during their childhood. Elena's romantic life also evolved as she gained confidence and perspective on healthy relationships. She eventually married a fellow investigative journalist who appreciated her intelligence and supported her career ambitions, building the kind of partnership based on mutual respect that had been completely absent from her family relationships. Their wedding took place in the garden of the Thompson mansion, transformed from a symbol of pain into a celebration of Elena's triumph over the limitations others had tried to impose on her. The marriage represented more than personal happiness. It demonstrated Elena's ability to trust and be vulnerable with someone who valued her authentic self rather than demanding that she conform to external expectations. The relationship became a model for all of Elena's subsequent interactions, based on honesty, mutual support, and the recognition that love should enhance rather than diminish the people involved. Elena's professional success continued to grow as she expanded her consulting practice and began writing books about corporate governance and financial transparency. Her work earned respect throughout the business and journalism communities, providing her with a platform to advocate for reforms that would prevent the kind of abuse and manipulation she had experienced within her own family. The platform also allowed Elena to help other people who were struggling with similar family dynamics and financial manipulation. Elena received letters and emails from people who recognized their own experiences in her story, and she made herself available to provide advice and support to anyone who was working to escape toxic relationships and build independent lives. Elena's story became a case study in business schools and psychology programs, illustrating how childhood trauma could be transformed into professional strength and how financial independence could serve as a tool for healing and empowerment. Elena was invited to speak at universities and conferences, sharing her experiences in ways that helped others understand the long-term effects of emotional abuse and the possibilities for recovery and success. The speaking engagements also provided Elena with opportunities to process her own experiences and continue her emotional healing. Each time she told her story, Elena gained new insights into the patterns and dynamics that had shaped her childhood, and she developed more sophisticated strategies for helping others who were facing similar challenges. Margaret's health declined significantly in the years following the loss of the house and her business authority. The stress of her reduced circumstances, combined with her inability to accept responsibility for the choices that had led to her downfall, took a visible toll on her physical and mental well-being. Elena learned about Margaret's health problems through David, but she felt no obligation to provide care or support for someone who had never shown her genuine love or concern. The decision to maintain distant from Margaret was difficult but necessary for Elena's continued emotional health. Elena had learned through therapy and experience that she couldn't save or change Margaret, and that any attempt to rebuild their relationship would require Elena to sacrifice her own well-being for someone who had never made similar sacrifices for her. Elena's story continued to evolve as she built new traditions and relationships that reflect her values rather than her family's dysfunctional patterns. She used the Thompson mansion to host gatherings for her chosen family of friends and colleagues, creating the kind of warm, supportive environment that had been completely absent during her childhood. The house also became a symbol of transformation and possibility. Elena opened it for charity events and fundraisers, using the space that had once represented privilege and exclusion to support causes that helped disadvantaged people build better lives for themselves. Elena's journey from worthless daughter to successful entrepreneur and homeowner represented more than personal triumph. It demonstrated the power of persistence, strategic thinking, and emotional healing to overcome even the most challenging family circumstances. Her story became proof that the labels and limitations imposed by others don't have to define a person's ultimate potential or worth. The house that had once been a prison became a testament to her strength and vision. Every room that had witnessed her humiliation now served as evidence of her success. The transformation was complete, not just in terms of ownership, but in terms of understanding her own capabilities and worth. As Elena settled into her role as the undisputed owner of both Thompson Industries and the family estate, she began to understand the full scope of what she had accomplished. The financial turnaround had required skills that went far beyond what most people learned in journalism school.
Elena had demonstrated expertise in corporate restructuring, strategic planning, financial analysis, and crisis management. These were exactly the business capabilities that Margaret had always insisted Elena lacked, yet Elena had developed them through her own initiative and applied them more successfully than either Margaret or David had managed during their years of leadership. The irony wasn't lost on Elena that her success had come from combining the analytical skills she developed as an investigative journalist with the business acumen she'd inherited from her father.
While Margaret had spent years trying to force Elena into a mold that didn't fit her natural talents, Elena had quietly been building exactly the skill set that Thompson Industries needed to survive and thrive in a changing market environment. Elena's approach to running Thompson Industries was dramatically different from the management style that Margaret and David had employed. Where they had relied on authority and intimidation to maintain control, Elena built consensus through transparency and inclusion. She instituted regular staff meetings where employees at every level could contribute ideas and voice concerns. She implemented performance-based compensation systems that rewarded innovation and efficiency rather than just loyalty and tenure. The cultural transformation within Thompson Industries was as significant as the financial recovery. Employees who had spent years walking on eggshells around Margaret's volatile moods and David's unpredictable decision-making began to relax and contribute more effectively. Productivity increased as people felt more secure in their positions and more confident that their efforts would be recognized and rewarded. Elena also modernized Thompson Industries' business practices in ways that reflected her understanding of contemporary market conditions and regulatory requirements. She invested in new technology systems that improved operational efficiency and provided better data for strategic planning. She established partnerships with environmental consulting firms to ensure that all of the company's operations met or exceeded current sustainability standards. She developed employee training programs that enhanced safety protocols and professional development opportunities. These changes required significant initial investment, but they positioned Thompson Industries for long-term growth and profitability in ways that Margaret and David's cost-cutting approaches never could have achieved. Elena understood that sustainable success required building organizational capacity rather than just minimizing expenses, and her willingness to make strategic investments despite short-term costs demonstrated the kind of long-term thinking that had been absent from the company's previous leadership. The success of Elena's business strategies attracted attention from industry analysts and business publications. Thompson Industries was featured in several case studies about successful corporate turnarounds, with Elena's leadership being credited as the primary factor in the company's recovery. The recognition was professionally satisfying, but it also served as public validation of Elena's capabilities in ways that directly contradicted Margaret's years of criticism and dismissal. Elena used her growing reputation in the business community to expand Thompson Industries beyond its traditional focus on energy exploration and production. She diversified the company's portfolio to include renewable energy projects, energy storage technologies, and environmental remediation services. These strategic expansions not only reduced the company's exposure to volatile oil and gas markets, but also positioned Thompson Industries as a leader in the emerging clean energy economy. The diversification strategy required Elena to develop expertise in completely new areas of business and technology. She approached this challenge with the same methodical research and analysis that had made her successful as an investigative journalist. Elena read extensively, attended industry conferences, consulted with technical experts, and gradually built the knowledge base necessary to make informed decisions about complex technological and market issues. Elena's ability to master new subject matter so effectively demonstrated the intellectual flexibility and learning capacity that Margaret had always dismissed as impractical. While Margaret had insisted that Elena's academic interests were irrelevant to business success, Elena was proving that the critical thinking and research skills she developed through her education were actually invaluable assets in navigating complex business challenges. The renewable energy initiatives also allowed Elena to align Thompson Industries with her personal values in ways that had never been possible under Margaret's leadership. Elena had always been concerned about environmental issues, but Margaret had dismissed these concerns as naive idealism that had no place in business decision-making. Now, Elena could pursue both profitability and environmental responsibility, proving that these goals weren't mutually exclusive when approached with creativity and strategic thinking. Elena's environmental initiatives earned Thompson Industries recognition from several sustainability organizations and helped the company secure contracts with clients who prioritized working with environmentally responsible vendors. The positive publicity also enhanced the company's reputation in ways that attracted better employees and created opportunities for additional business development. The success of these initiatives reinforced Elena's confidence in her own judgment and vision. Each successful project demonstrated that her instincts about market trends and business opportunities were sound, and that her approach to strategic planning was more effective than the reactive decision-making that had characterized the company's previous leadership. As Thompson Industries grew and prospered under Elena's leadership, she began to receive inquiries from other business owners who were facing similar challenges and wanted Elena's advice about corporate restructuring and strategic planning. These consulting opportunities were both financially lucrative and professionally rewarding, allowing Elena to help other families avoid the kind of financial devastation that had nearly destroyed her own family's business. Elena's consulting practice specialized in family-owned businesses, where personal relationships and business decisions had become unhealthily intertwined. Her own experience with family dysfunction gave her unique insights into the psychological and emotional factors that could undermine business effectiveness, and her success with Thompson Industries provided credibility that allowed her to command premium fees for her services. Many of Elena's consulting clients were surprised by her ability to quickly identify the underlying causes of their business problems and develop practical solutions that addressed both financial and interpersonal challenges. Elena's approach combined rigorous financial analysis with careful attention to communication patterns and decision-making processes, helping business families develop healthier ways of working together, or, in some cases, helping them recognize when separation was necessary for everyone's well-being. The consulting work also provided Elena perspective on her own family situation. By working with other dysfunctional business families, Elena gained a deeper understanding of the patterns and dynamics that had shaped her relationship with Margaret and David. She could see how Margaret's need for control and David's avoidance of conflict had created a toxic environment that made effective business decision-making nearly impossible. Elena also began to understand that Margaret's behavior toward her wasn't entirely personal, but reflected Margaret's own insecurities and limitations. Margaret had grown up in an era when women had fewer professional opportunities, and she had never developed the skills necessary to adapt to changing business conditions. Margaret's criticism of Elena may have been partly motivated by unconscious recognition that Elena possessed capabilities that Margaret herself lacked. This understanding didn't excuse Margaret's abusive behavior, but it helped Elena develop a more complex and nuanced perspective on their relationship. Elena could feel compassion for Margaret's limitations and insecurities while still maintaining appropriate boundaries to protect herself from continued manipulation and criticism. Elena used her growing reputation in the business community to expand Thompson Industries beyond its traditional focus on energy exploration and production. She diversified the company's portfolio to include renewable energy projects, energy storage technologies, and environmental remediation services. These strategic expansions not only reduced the company's exposure to volatile oil and gas markets, but also positioned Thompson Industries as a leader in the emerging clean energy economy. The diversification strategy required Elena to develop expertise in completely new areas of business and technology. She approached this challenge with the same methodical research and analysis that had made her successful as an investigative journalist. Elena read extensively, attended industry conferences, consulted with technical experts, and gradually built the knowledge base necessary to make informed decisions about complex technological and market issues. Elena's ability to master new subject matter so effectively demonstrated the intellectual flexibility and learning capacity that Margaret had always dismissed as impractical. While Margaret had insisted that Elena's academic interests were irrelevant to business success, Elena was proving that the critical thinking and research skills she'd developed through her education were actually invaluable assets in navigating complex business challenges. The renewable energy initiatives also allowed Elena to align Thompson Industries with her personal values in ways that had never been possible under Margaret's leadership. Elena had always been concerned about environmental issues, but Margaret had dismissed these concerns as naive idealism that had no place in business decision-making. Now, Elena could pursue both profitability and environmental responsibility, proving that these goals weren't mutually exclusive when approached with creativity and strategic thinking. Elena's environmental initiatives earned Thompson Industries recognition from several sustainability organizations and helped the company secure contracts with clients who prioritized working with environmentally responsible vendors. The positive publicity also enhanced the company's reputation in ways that attracted better employees and created opportunities for additional business development. The success of these initiatives reinforced Elena's confidence in her own judgment and vision. Each successful project demonstrated that her instincts about market trends and business opportunities were sound, and that her approach to strategic planning was more effective than the reactive decision-making that had characterized the company's previous leadership. As Thompson Industries grew and prospered under Elena's leadership, she began to receive inquiries from other business owners who were facing similar challenges and wanted Elena's advice about corporate restructuring and strategic planning.
Elena's insights about family business dynamics led her to write a book about the intersection of family relationships and business success. The book combined case studies from her consulting practice with research about organizational psychology and family systems theory. The writing process allowed Elena to synthesize her personal experiences with her professional expertise in ways that created a resource for other people facing similar challenges. The book was well received by both business and psychology professionals, earning positive reviews and generating speaking opportunities at conferences and workshops. Elena found that sharing her story and insights in this format was both personally healing and professionally beneficial, helping her establish herself as an expert in an important but often overlooked area of business consulting. Elena's speaking engagements brought her into contact with other successful women who had overcome difficult family circumstances to build impressive careers and businesses. These connections became the foundation for a network of mutual support and professional collaboration that enriched Elena's life in ways that went far beyond business success. For the first time in her life, Elena was surrounded by people who appreciated her intelligence, respected her achievements, and supported her ambitions without reservation or qualification. The contrast with her family relationships was stark and reinforced Elena's understanding that the criticism and dismissal she had experienced from Margaret and David reflected their own limitations rather than any deficiencies in her character or capabilities. Elena also began to develop romantic relationships with men who were attracted to her success and independence rather than threatened by it. Her increased confidence and financial security allowed her to be more selective about potential partners and to insist on relationships based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than need or convenience. The dating process was initially challenging for Elena, who had to learn to trust her own judgment about people's motivations and character. Years of manipulation and criticism had made her second-guess her instincts about relationships, and she had to consciously work to develop the confidence necessary to set appropriate boundaries and expectations. Elena's therapeutic work continued to be important during this period of personal and professional growth. Her therapist helped her recognize and address patterns of thinking and behavior that had been shaped by her childhood experiences but that were no longer serving her well in her adult relationships and business dealings. Therapy also helped Elena process the complex emotions associated with her success and Margaret's downfall. While Elena felt justified satisfaction at proving Margaret wrong about her capabilities, she also experienced grief about the family relationships that had been lost and sadness about the pain that all of them had experienced as a result of Margaret's inability to love and support her children unconditionally. Elena's emotional healing accelerated as she began to understand that she didn't need Margaret's approval or acknowledgement to validate her worth and success. The external recognition from business colleagues, clients, and professional organizations provided evidence of her value that was independent of family dynamics, and Elena gradually internalized this validation in ways that reduced her emotional vulnerability to Margaret's continued criticism and rejection. As Elena approached her 40th birthday, she reflected on the dramatic transformation that had occurred in her life over the previous decade. She had gone from being a successful but emotionally wounded journalist to becoming a respected business leader, consultant, and author. She owned valuable properties, had substantial financial assets, and had built a network of professional and personal relationships that provided both support and stimulation. Most importantly, Elena had developed a clear sense of her own identity and worth that wasn't dependent on other people's opinions or approval. She understood her strengths and limitations, had realistic goals for her future, and felt confident in her ability to handle whatever challenges might arise. The Thompson mansion had been completely transformed to reflect Elena's personality and values rather than Margaret's need for social status and intimidation. Elena had renovated the house with warm colors, comfortable furniture, and artistic touches that created an inviting atmosphere for the friends and colleagues who had become her chosen family.
Elena hosted regular dinner parties and social gatherings that brought together interesting people from various professional and personal contexts. The house that had once been a stage for family conflict and emotional abuse became a center for intellectual conversation, creative collaboration, and genuine friendship. Elena also used the house to support charitable causes that were important to her. She hosted fundraising events for organizations that provided scholarships to first-generation college students, supported women's business development programs, and assisted families dealing with financial abuse and exploitation. These charitable activities allowed Elena to use her resources and influence to help other people overcome the kind of obstacles that she had faced in her own life. The work was personally meaningful and professionally satisfying, creating a sense of purpose that went beyond individual success and wealth accumulation. Elena's relationship with David remained complicated, but had improved somewhat as Thompson Industries continued to thrive under her leadership. David had gradually come to accept that Elena's business acumen was superior to his own, and he had learned to work effectively within the management structure that Elena had established. David still struggled with resentment about the role reversal that had made Elena his boss rather than his subordinate, but he had also developed genuine respect for Elena's abilities and appreciation for the financial security that her leadership had provided for his own family. David's wife Stephanie had been particularly supportive of Elena's leadership, recognizing that Elena's success had saved their family from financial devastation. Elena maintained professional relationships with David that were cordial but not intimate. She included him in business decisions that affected his responsibilities and compensation, but she didn't seek his advice about strategic planning or major investments. The boundaries were clear and seemed to work for both of them, allowing them to collaborate effectively without rekindling the conflicts that had characterized their childhood relationship. Margaret's situation had continued to deteriorate as her health problems became more serious and her financial resources became more limited. She had developed diabetes and high blood pressure, conditions that were exacerbated by the stress of her reduced circumstances and her inability to accept responsibility for the choices that had led to her downfall. Margaret had also become increasingly isolated socially, as her pattern of manipulative and critical behavior had eventually alienated most of the friends and acquaintances who had once formed her support network. The few people who still maintained contact with Margaret did so primarily out of obligation or pity rather than genuine affection or respect. David had attempted to convince Elena to provide financial assistance for Margaret's medical expenses and living costs, but Elena had declined to take on this responsibility. Elena felt no obligation to support someone who had never provided her with emotional or financial support, and she recognized that any assistance she provided would likely be accompanied by continued criticism and rejection. Elena's decision to maintain boundaries with Margaret was supported by her therapist and by the friends and colleagues who had witnessed the effects of Margaret's abusive behavior. Elena understood that her refusal to help Margaret might be viewed by some people as cold or vindictive, but she also understood that protecting her own emotional health was necessary for her continued success and well-being. The contrast between Elena's thriving life and Margaret's declining circumstances was stark and undeniable. Elena had built wealth, professional recognition, and meaningful relationships through her own efforts and talents.
Margaret had lost her home, her business authority, and most of her social connections as a direct result of her poor choices and abusive behavior toward the people who might have supported her. Elena felt no satisfaction in Margaret's suffering, but she also felt no responsibility to alleviate it. Margaret had created her own circumstances through decades of selfish and destructive behavior, and Elena had no obligation to sacrifice her own well-being to rescue someone who had never shown her genuine love or concern. Elena's success story began to attract media attention as business journalists and documentary filmmakers recognized the dramatic nature of her family's situation and the broader implications of her experience for understanding family business dynamics and financial abuse. Elena was initially reluctant to participate in media interviews, but she eventually decided that sharing her story might help other people who were facing similar challenges. The media coverage was generally positive and focused on Elena's business achievements and personal resilience rather than sensationalizing the family conflict. Elena was careful to present her story in ways that emphasized the importance of financial independence and strategic thinking rather than encouraging revenge or vindictiveness toward family members. Elena's media appearances also provided opportunities to promote her book and consulting practice, which continued to grow as more business families sought her expertise about managing the intersection of personal relationships and professional responsibilities.
Elena's reputation as someone who had successfully navigated extremely difficult family circumstances gave her credibility with clients who were facing their own challenges with family dysfunction and business problems. The success of Elena's consulting practice allowed her to be increasingly selective about the clients she accepted and the projects she pursued. Elena chose to work primarily with business families who were genuinely committed to change and improvement rather than those who were simply looking for quick fixes or external validation for their existing approaches. Elena's consulting work also evolved to include training programs for financial advisors, attorneys, and other professionals who worked with family businesses and high-net-worth individuals. These programs focused on recognizing signs of financial abuse and manipulation within families and developing strategies for helping clients protect themselves from exploitation by family members. The training programs were well received and generated additional revenue streams that further enhanced Elena's financial security and professional reputation. Elena's expertise in this specialized area of practice made her one of the most sought-after consultants in the field, allowing her to command premium fees and choose her projects based on personal interest rather than financial necessity. Elena's romantic life also continued to evolve as she became more comfortable with her own success and more confident about her ability to attract partners who appreciated her intelligence and achievements. She dated several men who were successful in their own careers and who understood the demands and rewards of professional ambition. Elena eventually developed a serious relationship with a fellow entrepreneur who had built his own successful business and who shared her interests in both professional excellence and social responsibility. The relationship was based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than need or convenience, and it provided Elena with the kind of emotional support and intellectual stimulation that she had never experienced in her family relationships. The relationship also allowed Elena to experience healthy conflict resolution and communication patterns that contrasted sharply with the manipulation and emotional abuse that had characterized her childhood. Elena learned to express her needs and concerns directly, to listen to her partner's perspectives without becoming defensive, and to work together to solve problems rather than competing for dominance or control. These relationship skills enhanced Elena's effectiveness as a business leader and consultant, as she was able to apply the same principles of honest communication and collaborative problem-solving to her professional interactions. Elena's ability to build trust and maintain productive relationships became one of her most valuable professional assets. As Elena entered her 40s, she began to consider the legacy she wanted to create through her business and charitable activities. Thompson Industries had become a model for successful family business transition and corporate social responsibility, and Elena wanted to ensure that these values would continue to guide the company's operations even after her eventual retirement. Elena also wanted to expand her charitable activities to create more systematic support for young people who were dealing with family abuse and financial exploitation. She established a foundation that provided scholarships, counseling services, and legal assistance to individuals who were working to escape toxic family situations and build independent lives. The foundation's work was personally meaningful to Elena and professionally satisfying, allowing her to use her resources and expertise to address problems that she understood intimately from her own experience. The foundation also provided a vehicle for Elena to collaborate with other successful individuals who had overcome similar challenges and who wanted to support others who were facing comparable obstacles. Elena's foundation work brought her into contact with researchers and practitioners who were studying family dynamics, financial abuse, and trauma recovery. These connections enhanced Elena's understanding of her own experiences and provided new insights that she could apply to her consulting practice and writing projects. Elena also began working on a second book that would focus specifically on financial abuse within families and strategies for recovery and independence. The book would combine Elena's personal story with case studies from her foundation's work and research findings about the long-term effects of financial manipulation and exploitation. The writing process for the second book was more challenging than the first, as it required Elena to examine some of her most painful experiences in greater detail and to consider the broader social and psychological factors that allowed financial abuse to occur within families. However, the work was also deeply meaningful and provided Elena with additional opportunities to process her own experiences while creating resources that might help other people. Elena's second book was scheduled for publication during her 42nd year, coinciding with the 10-year anniversary of her takeover of Thompson Industries. The timing seemed appropriate for reflecting on the distance she had traveled and the transformation she had achieved through her own determination and strategic thinking. The anniversary also provided an opportunity for Elena to evaluate Thompson Industries' performance under her leadership and to consider the company's future direction. Under Elena's management, the company had not only recovered from near bankruptcy, but had grown to become one of the most successful and respected energy companies in the region. Thompson Industries' financial performance had exceeded industry averages in every year since Elena had taken control, and the company's reputation for innovation and social responsibility had attracted top-tier employees and high-value clients. The company's success had created substantial wealth for Elena and had provided financial security for David and the other employees who had remained with the company through its difficult transition period. Elena's success with Thompson Industries had also created opportunities for additional business ventures and investments that further diversified her financial portfolio and enhanced her professional reputation. Elena had become an angel investor for several technology startups that were developing innovations in renewable energy and environmental sustainability, sectors that aligned with her personal values and business expertise. The investment activities provided Elena with additional income streams and exposed her to emerging technologies and market trends that could influence Thompson Industries' future strategic direction. Elena's reputation as a successful business leader and strategic thinker made her a sought-after investor and advisor for entrepreneurs who were working to build companies in sectors that complement her existing business interests. Elena's various professional activities had created a complex and rewarding career that provided both financial success and personal satisfaction. She had built a business empire that reflected her values and capabilities, created employment opportunities for other people, and generated resources that she could use to support charitable causes and social initiatives that were important to her. Most importantly, Elena had proven definitively that Margaret's assessment of her worth and potential had been completely wrong. Elena had not only succeeded in areas where Margaret had predicted failure, but had exceeded expectations in ways that demonstrated capabilities and achievements that Margaret herself had never approached.
The vindication was complete and undeniable, but it had come at the cost of any possibility for healthy family relationships with Margaret, or for the kind of unconditional maternal love that Elena had craved throughout her childhood. Elena had gained everything she had worked for, but had lost the family connections that might have made her success even more meaningful and satisfying. Elena's story had become a powerful example of how personal trauma could be transformed into professional strength and how individual success could be used to create positive change for other people facing similar challenges. Her journey from worthless daughter to successful business leader and philanthropist demonstrated that external limitations and criticisms didn't have to determine a person's ultimate potential or achievements. The transformation was ongoing rather than complete, as Elena continued to grow and evolve both personally and professionally. Each new challenge and opportunity provided additional chances for Elena to demonstrate her capabilities and to further distance herself from the limiting beliefs that Margaret had tried to impose on her throughout her childhood. Elena's success had also created a new standard for Thompson family achievement that would influence how future generations understood their own potential and responsibilities. The family's legacy would now be defined by Elena's innovations and achievements, rather than by the traditional patterns of privilege and entitlement that had characterized previous generations. The house that had once symbolized Elena's exclusion and unworthiness had become a testament to her vision and determination. Every room that had witnessed her humiliation now served as evidence of her transformation and success. The circular nature of her journey from rejection to ownership provided a satisfying sense of completion and justice that made all of her struggles and sacrifices feel worthwhile and meaningful. The years that followed Elena's complete acquisition of the Thompson legacy brought unexpected developments that would test everything she had built and learned about herself. At 43, Elena had established herself as one of the most respected business leaders in Texas, but the call she received on a gray November morning would challenge her understanding of justice, forgiveness, and what it truly meant to win. David's voice on the phone carried a weight she hadn't heard since their father's death decades earlier. Margaret had suffered a massive stroke during the night and was in intensive care at Austin General Hospital. The doctors weren't optimistic about her recovery prospects, and David thought Elena should know, even though he wasn't sure she would care. Elena's initial reaction was silence.
She stared out the window of her home office in the Thompson mansion, watching the gardener she had hired tend to the roses that Margaret had once obsessed over. The woman who had shaped Elena's entire worldview through cruelty and manipulation was dying, and Elena felt nothing but a strange emptiness where she expected either grief or satisfaction to reside. The drive to the hospital gave Elena time to process emotions that were more complex than she had anticipated. Margaret represented the source of nearly every painful moment from Elena's childhood, but she was also the only mother Elena would ever have. The relationship had been poisonous and destructive, but it had also been the defining force that had driven Elena to achieve everything she had accomplished. Elena found David sitting alone in the intensive care unit waiting room, looking older and more fragile than she remembered. He had been managing the stress of Thompson Industries' continued growth under Elena's direction, while also dealing with his own family responsibilities and now Margaret's medical crisis. The weight of these combined pressures was evident in his posture and expression. Margaret looked smaller and more vulnerable than Elena had ever seen her. The woman who had once dominated every room she entered was now connected to machines that monitored her vital signs and breathing. Her face, which had always been carefully composed to project strength and control, was slack and peaceful in unconsciousness. Elena stood at Margaret's bedside for nearly an hour, studying the face that had haunted her dreams and motivated her ambitions for so many years. She tried to summon some feeling of triumph or vindication, but instead found herself remembering fragments of tenderness from early childhood before Margaret's disappointment and criticism had poisoned their relationship completely. The neurologist explained that Margaret had suffered extensive brain damage and was unlikely to regain consciousness. Even if she did wake up, she would probably have significant cognitive and physical impairments that would require long-term care. The prognosis was grim, and decisions about life support and medical intervention would need to be made within the next few days. David looked to Elena for guidance, even though Margaret had never given Elena any legal authority over her medical care. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that the daughter Margaret had dismissed as worthless was now being asked to make decisions about her most fundamental needs and future. Elena spent that night walking through the Thompson mansion, revisiting the spaces where she had endured Margaret's criticism and emotional abuse. The house had been transformed under Elena's ownership, but the memories remained embedded in its walls and corridors. Elena found herself in Margaret's former bedroom, which she had converted into a guest suite, trying to understand what she owed to the woman who had given her life but had never given her love. The decision Elena reached wasn't based on forgiveness or revenge, but on a more mature understanding of responsibility and compassion. Margaret deserved medical care and dignity, regardless of how she had treated Elena, not because she had earned it through kindness or love, but because she was a human being who was suffering. Elena arranged for Margaret to receive the best possible medical care in a private facility that specialized in long-term rehabilitation for stroke patients. She established a trust fund to cover all medical expenses and personal care costs, ensuring that Margaret would be comfortable and well treated regardless of her prognosis or recovery prospects. The arrangement was made quietly and without publicity, reflecting Elena's desire to do what was right without seeking recognition or credit for her generosity. Elena also made it clear that her financial support came with no expectation of gratitude or reconciliation. She was providing care because it was the ethical thing to do, not because she wanted to rebuild their relationship or earn Margaret's approval. David was surprised and grateful for Elena's decision to support Margaret's care, but he also seemed to understand that Elena's choice reflected her own values rather than any softening toward Margaret personally. Elena had become someone who could act with integrity even toward people who had treated her badly, a maturity that contrasted sharply with Margaret's lifelong pattern of conditional love and vindictive behavior. Margaret remained unconscious for 3 weeks before showing signs of limited awareness. When she finally opened her eyes, the damage from the stroke was immediately apparent. She could move only her left hand slightly and seemed to have difficulty understanding or responding to speech. The woman who had once controlled everyone around her through force of personality was now completely dependent on others for her most basic needs. Elena visited Margaret several times during her early recovery, partly out of curiosity and partly from a sense of obligation that she couldn't quite define. Margaret's eyes would track Elena's movements around the room, and there seemed to be moments of recognition, but communication was impossible. Elena would sit quietly, sometimes reading aloud from books or newspapers, wondering what Margaret understood about her current situation. During one of these visits, Elena thought she saw tears in Margaret's eyes when Elena mentioned the success of Thompson Industries and the growth of the foundation that was helping other families escape financial abuse. Elena couldn't be sure whether Margaret was experiencing regret, sadness, or just physical discomfort, but the possibility that Margaret might finally understand the consequences of her choices provided a strange kind of closure. Elena's care for Margaret became known within Austin's business and social communities, generating respect and admiration that Elena hadn't expected. People who knew the history of their relationship viewed Elena's generosity as evidence of remarkable character and maturity. The gesture enhanced Elena's reputation in ways that purely business success never could have achieved. The positive response to Elena's handling of Margaret's medical crisis also created new opportunities for Elena to expand her charitable work and public speaking about family reconciliation and forgiveness. Elena was careful to clarify that supporting Margaret's medical care didn't constitute forgiveness of past abuse, but rather represented a choice to act ethically regardless of personal history. Elena's nuanced approach to the situation resonated with many people who had struggled with similar family conflicts and wondered how to balance self-protection with compassion for family members who had treated them poorly. Elena's example provided a model for how to maintain appropriate boundaries while still acting with integrity and kindness. Thompson Industries continued to thrive during this period, with Elena's leadership becoming even more confident and effective as she gained experience managing complex situations and competing priorities. The company's expansion into renewable energy sectors had positioned it perfectly for the growing demand for sustainable business practices, and Elena's reputation for ethical leadership attracted clients who valued working with socially responsible companies. Elena's consulting practice also continued to grow, with her expertise in family business dynamics becoming increasingly valuable as more families struggled to navigate generational transitions and changing economic conditions. Elena's combination of business acumen and psychological insight made her uniquely qualified to help families address both practical and emotional challenges that were undermining their professional effectiveness. The publication of Elena's second book generated significant media attention and speaking opportunities that further enhanced her professional reputation. The book's focus on financial abuse within families addressed issues that many people had experienced but few were willing to discuss publicly. Elena's willingness to share her own story in service of helping others earned her respect from both professional colleagues and the general public. Elena's romantic relationship had also continued to develop and deepen, with her partner providing emotional support and intellectual companionship that enriched her life in ways that went far beyond professional success. They had begun discussing marriage and possibly starting a family, conversations that represented Elena's growing confidence in her ability to create healthy relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The prospect of motherhood was both exciting and terrifying for Elena, who had no positive role model for maternal behavior and worried about her ability to provide the kind of unconditional love and support that she had never received from Margaret. Elena's therapist helped her understand that recognizing what she didn't want to repeat was actually an advantage in breaking cycles of dysfunction and creating healthier family patterns. Elena's foundation had grown substantially since its establishment, providing scholarships and support services to hundreds of young people who were working to escape abusive family situations and build independent lives. The foundation's work had also led to policy changes and legislative initiatives that provided better legal protection for individuals facing financial exploitation by family members. The foundation's success provided Elena with a sense of purpose and meaning that complemented her business achievements and personal happiness. Helping other people overcome obstacles similar to those she had faced felt like the most valuable use of the resources and influence she had accumulated through her own struggles and successes. Elena's work with the foundation also brought her into contact with researchers and advocates who were studying the long-term effects of childhood emotional abuse and developing new therapeutic approaches for trauma recovery. These connections enhanced Elena's understanding of her own healing process and provided insights that she could share with other survivors through her writing and speaking engagements. As Elena approached her 45th birthday, she began to consider what legacy she wanted to create through her various professional and charitable activities. Thompson Industries had become a model for successful family business transition and corporate social responsibility, but Elena wanted to ensure that the company's values and practices would continue to reflect her vision even after her eventual retirement. Elena also wanted to expand her foundation's reach and impact by creating partnerships with other organizations that shared similar missions and values. The foundation's work had demonstrated that individual initiative and strategic support could help people overcome significant obstacles, but Elena understood that systemic change required broader collaboration and advocacy efforts. Elena's relationship with David had continued to evolve and improve as they worked together to manage both Thompson Industries' growth and Margaret's medical care. David had gradually come to appreciate Elena's leadership qualities and to understand that her success benefited his own family's security and future prospects. Their professional collaboration had also helped them develop a more respectful personal relationship that acknowledged their shared history while focusing on current realities and future goals. David's wife Stephanie had become particularly supportive of Elena's leadership and had encouraged David to recognize Elena's contributions to the family's well-being. Stephanie's perspective as an outsider to the family's historical dynamics allowed her to appreciate Elena's achievements without the emotional baggage that had complicated David's acceptance of his sister's success. Elena's care for Margaret had also influenced how David thought about family responsibility and moral obligation. He had been surprised by Elena's willingness to support someone who had treated her so poorly, and her example had caused him to reconsider his own relationships and responsibilities within the family. Margaret's condition remained stable but showed little improvement over the months following her stroke. She had regained some ability to communicate through gestures and facial expressions, but speech remained extremely limited and her physical mobility was severely restricted. The medical staff reported that she seemed to understand what was happening around her, but was frustrated by her inability to express herself clearly. Elena continued to visit Margaret regularly, though their interactions remained largely one-sided. Elena would update Margaret about Thompson Industries' performance, the foundation's activities, and general family news, treating these visits as opportunities to practice compassion and demonstrate the kind of consideration that Margaret had never shown to her. During one particularly memorable visit, Elena brought photo albums from her childhood and teenage years, sharing memories and stories about events that Margaret might remember from her own perspective. Elena found herself talking about positive experiences and accomplishments that Margaret had witnessed but had rarely acknowledged or celebrated at the time.
Elena also shared details about her current life and achievements, describing the home she had created in the Thompson mansion, the success of her business ventures, and the satisfaction she found in helping other people through her foundation work. Elena couldn't be sure how much Margaret understood, but she felt that Margaret deserved to know how her daughter's life had developed and flourished despite the obstacles Margaret had created. Elena's reflection on her relationship with Margaret had deepened her appreciation for the people who had provided genuine support and encouragement throughout her journey. She thought often about her great-aunt Patricia, who had offered financial assistance during Elena's legal battle with Margaret, and about the teachers, professors, and mentors who had recognized Elena's potential when her own family couldn't see it. Elena made a point of staying in contact with people who had helped her along the way, recognizing that her success had been partly because of their willingness to invest time and energy in her development. Elena also tried to provide similar support and encouragement to young people who reminded her of her younger self, creating informal mentoring relationships that enriched her life while helping others navigate their own challenges. Elena's speaking engagements had evolved to focus increasingly on themes of resilience, transformation, and the importance of creating supportive communities for people who were working to overcome difficult circumstances. Her presentations combined personal narrative with practical advice about building financial independence, developing professional skills, and maintaining psychological health while dealing with family conflict. The audiences for Elena's speaking engagements were diverse and included business professionals, social workers, educators, and individuals who were dealing with their own family challenges. Elena's ability to speak about painful experiences with both honesty and hope resonated with people from many different backgrounds who were seeking inspiration and practical guidance for their own lives. Elena's second book had been so well received that publishers were encouraging her to write a third book
that would focus on the positive outcomes that were possible for people who successfully escaped abusive family situations. Elena was considering this project, but wanted to ensure that any additional writing would serve a constructive purpose, rather than simply capitalizing on public interest in her story. Elena's business interests had continued to expand and diversify as she identified new opportunities that aligned with her values and expertise. She had become an early investor in several companies that were developing technologies for renewable energy storage and distribution, sectors that represented the future of the energy industry and reflected Elena's commitment to environmental sustainability. Elena had also begun exploring opportunities in education technology, particularly platforms that could provide high-quality educational resources to students who lacked access to traditional academic support systems. These investments reflected Elena's understanding that education had been the key to her own liberation and success, and her desire to help other young people access similar opportunities. The financial success of Elena's various business ventures had created wealth that exceeded her personal needs and provided resources that she could use to support causes and individuals that were important to her. Elena's approach to wealth management reflected the same careful planning and strategic thinking that had characterized her business leadership, but with an emphasis on creating positive social impact rather than simply maximizing returns. Elena's romantic relationship had culminated in an engagement that represented her confidence in her ability to create and maintain healthy, intimate partnerships. Her fiancé shared her values and supported her professional ambitions, while also providing the emotional stability and companionship that had been missing from her earlier years. The wedding planning process allowed Elena to create the kind of celebration that reflected her authentic preferences, rather than family expectations or social pressures. The ceremony would take place in the garden of the Thompson mansion, transforming the space that had once symbolized Elena's exclusion into a setting for joy and commitment. Elena's guest list included the friends, colleagues, and mentors who had supported her journey, rather than biological family members who had created obstacles and pain. David and Stephanie would attend, representing Elena's hope for continued improvement in their relationship, but Margaret's condition made her attendance impossible. Elena had visited Margaret to share the news of her engagement, hoping to gauge whether Margaret understood the significance of this development in Elena's life. Margaret's response was difficult to interpret, but Elena thought she detected a flicker that might have been approval or satisfaction in Margaret's eyes. Elena's wedding represented more than a personal milestone. It symbolized her complete transformation from the wounded and dismissed daughter into a confident and successful woman who had created the life she wanted through her own determination and wisdom. The ceremony would mark the beginning of a new chapter that was built on love and mutual respect rather than competition and conflict. The guest list for Elena's wedding included several other women who had overcome similar family challenges and had built successful careers and relationships despite difficult beginnings. Elena had maintained friendships with many of these women, and their presence at her wedding represented the supportive community that had replaced the toxic family dynamics of her childhood. Elena's foundation work had also connected her with young people who reminded her of her younger self, and she had invited several of these individuals to participate in her wedding as a way of demonstrating her commitment to supporting the next generation of survivors and achievers. Their presence added meaning to the celebration while also providing them with examples of what was possible through persistence and strategic planning. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful and meaningful, combining traditional elements with personal touches that reflected Elena's journey and values. Elena's vows included commitments to honesty, mutual support, and shared growth that contrasted sharply with the conditional and manipulative relationships that had characterized her childhood family dynamics. Elena's honeymoon provided an opportunity for reflection on how far she had traveled from the frightened and criticized daughter who had once lived in the same house where she was now celebrating her marriage. The transformation was complete, not just in terms of external circumstances, but in terms of her understanding of her own worth and potential. Elena returned from her honeymoon with renewed energy for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Thompson Industries continued to require strategic leadership as the energy industry evolved, and Elena's foundation was expanding its services to reach more people who needed support and guidance. Elena's consulting practice was also growing, with demand for her expertise exceeding her available time. Elena had also begun considering the possibility of starting a family with her new husband, a prospect that excited and challenged her in equal measure. Elena's own experience of motherhood would be shaped by her determination to provide the kind of unconditional love and support that she had never received from Margaret, breaking the cycle of dysfunction that had characterized previous generations of Thompson women. Elena's pregnancy was announced 18 months after her wedding, generating excitement and congratulations from the extended network of friends and colleagues who had watched Elena build her new life. The prospect of becoming a mother represented the ultimate validation of Elena's transformation from victor to victor, from worthless daughter to successful business leader and nurturing parent. Elena's approach to pregnancy and preparation for motherhood reflected the same careful planning and commitment to excellence that had characterized her business and charitable activities. She read extensively about child development and parenting strategies, consulted with child psychologists and educators, and created support systems that would help her provide the best possible environment for her child's growth and development. Elena also spent considerable time reflecting on what she had learned about healthy relationships and effective communication through her own therapeutic work and personal growth. She was determined to create family dynamics based on respect, encouragement, and unconditional love, rather than the criticism and competition that had defined her own childhood experience. Margaret's condition had remained stable throughout Elena's pregnancy, and Elena had continued to visit regularly, sharing updates about her life and the grandchild that Margaret would probably never be able to know in any meaningful way. Elena felt sadness about Margaret's inability to participate in this new chapter, but she also felt relief that her child would be protected from the kind of toxic influence that had shaped her own early years.
Elena's daughter was born on a spring morning that seemed to symbolize new beginnings and fresh possibilities. Holding her child for the first time, Elena felt a surge of protective love that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The baby represented not just Elena's own future, but the possibility of creating family relationships based on joy and mutual support rather than fear and criticism. Elena named her daughter Grace, a choice that reflected her hope that this child would grow up knowing that she was valued and cherished simply for who she was, not for what she achieved or how well she met external expectations. Grace would inherit not just financial resources and social advantages, but also the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally by parents who understood the importance of nurturing her authentic self. Elena's experience of motherhood exceeded her highest expectations and provided her with a sense of completion that had been missing from even her greatest professional achievements. Caring for Grace allowed Elena to experience the kind of selfless love that she had never received from Margaret, and providing that love felt healing in ways that Elena hadn't anticipated. Elena's approach to balancing motherhood with her professional responsibilities reflected her commitment to being present and engaged in her daughter's life, while also maintaining the business activities and charitable work that provided meaning and financial security for their family. Elena was determined to avoid the mistakes that Margaret had made, both in terms of emotional availability and in terms of providing appropriate support for Grace's individual interests and talents. Elena's husband proved to be an equal partner in parenting, sharing childcare responsibilities and supporting Elena's continued professional activities without resentment or competition. Their relationship provided Grace with an example of healthy partnership and mutual respect that would influence her understanding of relationships throughout her life. Thompson Industries continued to thrive under Elena's leadership, even as she adjusted to the demands of new motherhood. Elena had built such effective systems and developed such capable staff that the company could operate successfully even when her attention was divided between business and family responsibilities. Elena's foundation work also continued during this period, with Elena finding that her experience as a mother enhanced her understanding of the challenges faced by families dealing with abuse and dysfunction. Elena's perspective on child welfare and family dynamics had deepened through her own parenting experience, making her advocacy work even more passionate and effective. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep when Grace was 6 months old, ending a chapter of Elena's life that had been defined by conflict and pain, but that had ultimately led to transformation and success. Elena felt sadness at Margaret's death, not because she mourned the loss of a loving relationship, but because Margaret's passing represented the final closing of any possibility for understanding or reconciliation between them. Elena's eulogy at Margaret's funeral focused on Margaret's strength and resilience as a widow who had managed significant business responsibilities during an era when women had fewer opportunities and support systems. Elena chose to remember Margaret's positive qualities rather than dwelling on the pain that Margaret had caused, demonstrating the grace and maturity that Elena had developed through years of therapeutic work and personal growth. Margaret's death also meant that Elena was now the sole surviving connection to her father's legacy and the final authority over the Thompson family's history and traditions. Elena felt the weight of this responsibility, but also the freedom to shape that legacy according to her own values and vision rather than being constrained by Margaret's expectations and limitations. Elena decided to write a memoir that would tell the complete story of her transformation from dismissed daughter to successful business leader and devoted mother. The book would serve multiple purposes, preserving family history for Grace and future generations, providing inspiration and guidance for other people facing similar challenges, and creating a permanent record of the positive changes that were possible through determination and strategic thinking. The memoir project required Elena to revisit painful memories and experiences that she had worked hard to process and move beyond, but the writing also provided opportunities for additional healing and closure. Elena approached the project with the same thoroughness and honesty that had characterized her investigative journalism, creating a narrative that was both personally meaningful and potentially helpful to other readers. Elena's memoir was published to critical acclaim and commercial success, resonating with readers who had faced their own family challenges and inspiring people who were working to overcome difficult circumstances. The book's success also generated additional speaking opportunities and media appearances that allowed Elena to continue advocating for people who were dealing with family abuse and financial exploitation. Elena's story had become a powerful example of how individual determination and strategic thinking could transform even the most challenging circumstances into opportunities for growth and success. Her journey from worthless daughter to respected business leader, devoted mother, and influential advocate demonstrated that external limitations and criticisms didn't have to determine a person's ultimate potential or achievements. As Elena approached her 50th birthday, she reflected on the dramatic changes that had occurred in her life over the previous 2 decades. She had built a business empire, created a loving family, and established a foundation that was helping other people escape similar challenges. Most importantly, she had developed a clear understanding of her own worth and capabilities that was independent of other people's opinions or approval. Elena's success story had come full circle, demonstrating that the house which had once represented exclusion and worthlessness could be transformed into a symbol of achievement and possibility. The Thompson mansion now served as headquarters for Elena's various business and charitable activities, a gathering place for friends and colleagues, and a loving home where Grace was growing up surrounded by encouragement and support. Elena's legacy was already being written through the lives of the people she had helped, the positive changes she had created in her community, and the example she had set for overcoming adversity through intelligence, persistence, and integrity. Grace would inherit not just financial resources, but also the knowledge that she came from a family where transformation and triumph were possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Elena's story continued to evolve as she embraced new challenges and opportunities, but the fundamental transformation from victim to victor was complete and irreversible. She had proven definitively that Margaret's assessment of her worth had been wrong, not through revenge or vindictiveness, but through the positive creation of a life that reflected her authentic values and capabilities. The little girl who had once hidden in the basement to escape criticism had become a woman who owned the entire house and had transformed it into a place of love, success, and possibility. Elena's journey was proof that the most painful beginnings could lead to the most meaningful endings, and that true victory came not from defeating others, but from becoming the best version of oneself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.